To the final Fleets in Charge webinar of 2021, where we'll be looking back on over the year and also looking ahead to what next year may bring. It's been an exceptionally busy year with the UK hosting COP26 in November, and we've seen a number of significant government announcements such as the ZEV sales mandate and the phase-out date being set for HGVs. And I'm sure we'll hear more about some of those announcements from Natasha Robinson shortly. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, our speakers, and also you, our audience. We launched this series just over a year ago, and in that time, we've had over 1,000 attendees. We've had some really lively discussion and debate. So I'd encourage you to use the chat functionality and also pose any questions to our speakers and panelists this morning using the tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Before we get started, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping. So this morning's event is being recorded and will be available afterwards. And just a reminder that all BVRLA events are held in accordance with competition law. And we must therefore refrain from discussions into any of the areas highlighted on the slide in red. So please, no discussions about pricing, strategy, or anything that relates to individual suppliers or customers, or indeed anything that could be deemed as commercially sensitive. So before I hand over to Natasha, I'd like to kick off the first poll for this morning. So the poll can be found under the events tab under polls. And the first poll is, do you think that COP26 made a difference to firms and individual decarbonisation plans in the UK? Some of the options there are yes, it's made decarbonisation mainstream. Maybe it's too early to tell. No, it won't have a lasting impact on individuals and firms. And what was COP26? So if you can vote there, I will introduce Natasha. And then before we go into the Q&A with Natasha, we can reflect on the poll results. So I'd like to welcome Natasha Robinson to the stage. Natasha is the joint head of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. A good friend of the BVRLA and has joined us in the past. So great to see you again, Natasha. Thanks for joining us this morning, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's always a pleasure to talk to fleets about this transition. And this has, as Catherine said, been a really exciting year. Obviously, a very difficult year as well. We've still had COVID, we've had quite a lot of restrictions, and that's had an impact on businesses. But from an EV point of view, so much has happened, and it really feels to me like a bit of an inflection point. But that isn't to say that there isn't still a lot to do and a lot more to go. So I was just going to highlight a few of my key points from the last year. I'm going to go slightly back into 2020 because it's only just over a year ago that the government announced that we would look for no new internal combustion engine cars and vans from 2030, and that all new cars and vans would be zero emission at the tailpipe from 2035. And since then, we've really seen a lot more vehicles on the road. Another thing that happened just at the end of 2020 was the introduction of green number plates for cars, vans, mopeds. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been spotting more and more on the road. It's one of the things I do. I have a 6-year-old. We walk to school. We travel around and we try and spot green number plates. And it's been getting easier and easier with each month that passes. And that's not particularly surprising because I think some of the numbers of vehicles being sold in September, we had the same number of pure battery electric vehicles sold, almost the same number as the whole of 2019. And we've had so far 650,000 plug-in vehicles sold since 2010 and on our roads. So it is getting more and more likely that you're going to see some. We've also seen a big increase in the amount of charging points and chargers going on the network. This is something, obviously most people will charge at home overnight or possibly if you're a fleet, maybe in a depot overnight. But we do need to make sure that the public network is there and it's operational. I was just looking at ZapMap, and we're now, in the last 30 days, there have been over 1,145 devices being put onto the network, and 145 of those are rapids. So we've really seen a huge increase in the numbers and that acceleration happening. And one of the things that has struck me over the last year is the sort of number of announcements and commitments that we've had from the likes of BP, Shell, GridServe, so all of the major charge point operators have been really putting their best foot forward in terms of making new commitments and putting in chargers and going that. But there is, a lot more to go on that in order to get to where we need to be with 100% zero emission vehicles for new vehicles from 2035. Other highlights, COP26 has been mentioned. We had more than 110 signatories to COP26, including many countries around the world, both developed countries and developing countries, a number of the major vehicle manufacturers. And for me, that wouldn't have happened, even say a couple of years ago. We had Jaguar Land Rover, General Motors, BYD, Ford, all signing up to the transition to zero emission vehicles. So I think what we're really seeing, as I said, is that sort of tipping point of inevitability, but we do need to take consumers with us and fleets with us. So working with the BVRLA and other fleets, I think is really critical around sort of thinking about how we can structure our network and how we can make sure that it works for fleets. And that's something that I've personally been spending quite a bit of time on, and thinking how we can do it, and working with BVRLA members directly. And we've had a number of round tables with ministers sort of talking about some of the challenges that you face, and also working through some of the biggest members of BVRLA through something called the Electric Vehicle Fleet Accelerator. This was kicked off from the PM's Build Back Better Business Council and involves Lloyds, Royal Mail, a number of BVRLA members, and has committed to buying 100,000 British-built electric vans by 2030 to help sort of unlock some of that investment in the UK. And we are seeing the impacts of that. We've seen commitments from Nissan to their factory up in Sunderland to make electric vehicles, Stellantis to their Port Talbot facility making vans, Ford to making electric drivetrains. So we're really seeing the auto sector start to bring the funding in and making a difference. And to underpin that, the UK government has made a commitment to £2.5 billion of funding over the period from this year out till sort of 2024-25 in order to support that. And that's really going to help to unlock some of the more difficult cases. So particularly focused on things like people who don't have off-street parking, how can we support those? And focused on things like the motorway service areas and making sure that they have enough grid capacity. We're also looking at making sure that we've got the right regulatory structure in place. Obviously, this is a whole new area, so there aren't necessarily regulations in there already. This is a quite exciting week. We've got our smart regulations going through the House of Commons at the moment. That will bring into law that all new charge points have to be smart when they're sold for domestic purposes. We've also announced that we're very shortly going to be publishing our legislation that all new homes will have to have a 7 kilowatt charge point fitted as standard. That will mean about 145,000 charge points put on new homes every year in this country. We're also quite shortly going to be putting in new regulations around what we call the consumer offer. So we've committed that all new fast and rapid charge points will be required to have contactless payment. And we are doing a lot of work on things like open data, trying to make sure that that information is out there. But at the end of the day, what we really want is for people to gain confidence and to really want to go into that car showroom, go into their van, think, the fleet, your fleet managers picking up the phone and saying, yes, what I'd like to do is to do an EV. So I really hope that this session will help with that and help you have a think about what challenges there are. And genuinely, we're really interested to hear what those are and to understand what you see the challenges as being and how we can help to address those. But it is a really exciting point in this journey.
Thanks, Natasha. I think we're encouraging people to put questions in the Q&A box, but I'm not seeing any at the moment. So I'll kick us off with a question. So what do you think COP26 has meant for transport decarbonisation? And do you think we are on track to meet the 2030 and 35 phase-out dates?
So I take the COP26 one first. I think it's really important because one of the critical aspects is that this is not just a UK issue. I mean, your members will know, if you're buying a car or van, you might buy one from the UK, but very much it's a European market. You'll look for where you can get the vehicle that meets your needs. Equally, the whole supply chains and things are global. So it really needs to be a worldwide transition. And it's felt like that in the UK and in some of the other leading economies for some time. We work really closely with them. But I think that's really opening out. I mean, particularly if you look at some of the statements that America have made since the Biden administration came in. If you look at the amazing steps going on in China, I think we're really starting to see that sort of that worldwide transition. And that's what you need in order to, get the economies of scale. And if we're looking at this from a carbon point of view, it doesn't matter where the carbon comes from, it all affects global warming. So this can't be something that just happens, in a few leading economies. It needs to be everywhere. And we're really starting to see that. I think one of the really interesting stuff that will be coming out of COP26 is some work on how we can help, sort of countries which are maybe less developed, less advanced in this, catch up and sort of leapfrog some of this and get forward. So I think that will be really exciting. On the 2030, 2035, are we on track? I would say, yes, it is achievable, but there is also an awful lot to do between now and 2030 and 35. I mentioned some of the things around infrastructure and some of the things we have going on that front. But yes, it will involve a lot of collaboration between government and industry, particularly. This isn't something that that the government is going to fund all of or do all of the frameworks for. It really needs to be everybody working together in terms of making this transition. But I have a lot of confidence in it because I think, the products that are out there, particularly if I compare to when we were speaking a few years ago, you're really starting to see the vehicles coming to market that meet the needs of consumers. Definitely in the car market and starting to get there in the van market as well. And what we want to see is that continue. And you mentioned the HGV phase out announcement in your introduction, then moving up to HGVs, which are definitely at an earlier stage than cars and vans at the moment.
And I guess on that point, are there any particular pinch points that you can see? And what do you think the role of government is in terms of sort of intervention versus support?
So I think the main role, I think one of our roles is to get out the way where industry do it best and to allow the innovation and to allow the private investment to come in. But our other role is to make sure that we are supporting those areas which do need it. And from our point of view, some of that is definitely on the infrastructure side around, as I said, the business case for on-street charging, that is still developing at the moment. I think rapid destination charging, we're not really looking to intervene in that market because it's feeling good, apart from, as I said, in motorway service areas where we know that, for the amount of energy that we need to make sure that we're future-proofing the grid and really making it ready for 100% uptake. So trying to identify those areas where the market won't provide and supporting there, and making sure that we do have the right regulation and structure in order to support that, with an emphasis on consumers and drivers, which is why we're looking at stuff like opening up payment systems and ensuring that there's contactless payment.
Brilliant. And I see we've got a question from David Petts, which is, will the category B 4.25 tonne BEV derogation be extended beyond 2023?
Can't guarantee that yet, but just say that we're looking at it, and I'm very confident that we will find a solution.
Fantastic. And thanks for the question, David. And I guess, over the past year, there's been a lot of big announcements and a lot of sort of, consultations and things like that. Do you see that same level of momentum going into next year, or do you think it's more a case of the sort of devil being in the detail and really trying to, you talk a lot about getting to grips with industry and working with it. How do you sort of see that being balanced?
I don't see any let up on the focus on it, to be honest. So we've recently, one consultation I didn't mention was we've also recently been doing a consultation looking at whether we should be putting more obligations onto local authorities, particularly around planning charge points. Some of them are really good on this. Some of them need some more support and assistance. So we're looking to do quite a lot of that. So yes, there is a lot more to come. And a lot more focus, and definitely the devil in the detail. So the ZEV mandate, which we have announced we will have a ZEV mandate, but the real bite on that and the real working part of that will come in the next year or so, when we consult on what that looks like and what that means for sort of uptake in the UK. So yes, a lot of work across a lot of different areas, I think.
That was a partly selfish question. How many consultations I've got coming next year.
Oh yeah, sorry, probably more.
We've got a question here from Rui Ferrara, who's on our panel a bit later on. The plug-in car grant has evolved over the year. Has it met the objectives in your view? And are there any insights on the direction of future support?
Yeah, so I think on the plug-in car grant, it has increased a lot over time. We've spent about £1.5 billion on the plug-in car grant since 2011, and that's supported about 400,000 ultra-low emission vehicles. But I think it's telling on the market that 25% of that has been in the last year. So what we're looking to do with the plug-in car grant is to particularly support the early market and to really transition to towards that sort of mass market. So ministers have been quite clear that grants are not forever. What we want is a sustainable market long term, and that what we will be looking to do is to increasingly target the plug-in car grant. We already did that a bit in March last year, so we introduced a price cap of £35,000, so we could target it at the more affordable end of the market, and we'll look to continue to do that. I can't be too much more specific, because obviously it's quite price and commercially sensitive, but we do always keep it under review, and we will be continuing that focus. And for me, I think particularly looking at things like, the van market, which is further behind the car market, providing support on that front, and also critically looking at how it interacts with things like the taxation system, and that side of things. Because from a consumer perspective, they're looking at the whole cost. Or they hopefully are, and one of the challenges is how we help people to do that, but looking at the total cost of ownership and thinking about all those things. So you've got things like less duty and that sort of thing on the cars as well.
Thank you. I've got loads coming in now. So
it's always the way.
Mike Potter has asked, when will BIC be confirmed beyond 2025?
I will refer to my continuous answer on that, which was taxation stuff is a matter for the Chancellor. So I would expect any future confirmation on that, one way or another, to be at a future fiscal event. So probably a budget.
And Matt Chase has asked, or comment and a question, seen challenges accessing work charge points, 9 not working this week, resulting in breakdown and then recovery of my vehicle. Will there be incentives, penalties on infrastructure providers?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we did consult on earlier this year, was around reliability for charge points. It's very closely linked to the point I was making before around sort of data and trying to open up data access as well, because it's part of the same equation. So we are looking really closely at reliability and how we might regulate in that area, and look at that side of things. So I can't completely confirm at the moment, but I would say sort of watch this space. And it is an area, as an EV driver myself, that is quite frustrating. You know, more and more you have the charge points there, but if they don't work for you, you know, it can be, you know, very annoying. And like you said, potentially you get stranded, which is really not the where you want to be.
Thanks, Natasha. And a question from Nigel Casey around the second-hand market and how and what you're going to be doing to encourage the second-hand market.
Yeah, such an interesting area, and really one. I mean, obviously we're only really getting to the point of the second-hand market now. I mean, we obviously had the Nissan Leaf 2014, 2013. That was really starting to take off. In the UK, you've got, you know, i3s and that sort of thing. But in terms of things getting through that first sort of 2-3 year lease cycle and onto the second-hand market, that's starting to grow now. And it's one of the areas we're really interested in. So one of the bits that there's quite a lot of work going on internationally, and we're thinking about what we can do in the UK context, is around sort of battery health. Because obviously when you buy a second-hand ICE vehicle at the moment, you know, you look at mileage, you look at some of the other bits, but if you're buying a second-hand EV, what you really want to know is how healthy is the battery, and that side of things. So there's a lot of work going on internationally, sort of looking at that, and looking at standards where you could do that. I think that's a really exciting bit of the work. But yeah, a lot more to do in that, and we're going to be, I think, holding a workshop with BVRLA members about second-hand vehicles. I think it's in January, but I'm really looking forward to that.
And we are out of time, but I'm just going to ask one final question, which is, when you say that you want industry sort of support and help, and industry allowed to just crack on with it, is there anything specific that we can do as a sector that will boost uptake that we aren't already doing?
I think you are doing a lot of it. I mean, a lot of the fleets I talk to are really thinking about this. I think one of the challenges that we're looking at the moment, and I was actually having some discussions about it earlier this week, but sort of thinking to, as I said, we're looking at local authorities and their sort of planning role in developing charging infrastructure. And obviously the needs of fleets can be the same as individual consumers, but also can be a bit different. And I think we're getting a fairly good handle on what individuals want. But what we really need to do is to sort of make that link between the needs of fleets, which could be things like longer charging bays, you know, maybe 22 kilowatt chargers rather than 7 kilowatt chargers, or even rapids. You know, what are the needs of fleets in areas, and how can we make sure that we're linking that up with local authorities so that they understand what they need to provide in their area to help fleets go electric. So I think that would be my big challenge at the moment. I mean, the first one would be, you know, think about your vehicles. Can you go electric? Which ones could go now? Can you trial it? But beyond that, what are the needs that you have, and how can we help join that up between sort of local authorities and who are doing the planning for their area and fleets, so that we really have the sort of environment that people need to make the switch confidently.
That's been fantastic, Natasha. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And thank you for the flurry of questions that came in towards the end of that session. Thanks again, Natasha, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Next this morning, we have Mike Potter. But before I introduce Mike, we have a second poll that relates to if there was unlimited supply this year, how much higher do you think BEV sales would be? And again, I'll reflect on the poll results when we go into the Q&A with Mike. But I'd like to welcome Mike onto the screen. So Mike Potter is the CEO of Drive Electric. Mike joined us at the first Fleets in Charge of this year and gave us some sort of predictions and some forecasts. So be interesting to hear from Mike about whether they've come to fruition and what trends he foresees for 2022. So good morning, Mike. Over to you.
Morning. Thanks, Catherine. So I thought that I'd reflect a little bit on this year, and I've got some stats for next year. I remarked to my daughter this morning that I feel like the Mystic Meg of EVs now with the predictions. So in terms of where we've been through this year, we obviously have seen quite an uptick in registrations. If we get another 15,000 in December, we had 20,000 last December, but I think the supply will be short. We should be about 174,000 for the year, up from about 100,000 for last year. So that's obviously a good move up. Importantly, now dramatically outselling diesels, which I'll come on to. I don't think it's a good thing, particularly diesel v petrol, but dramatically outselling diesels now. And in November, 18% BEV, not adding the plugins together, and the plugins are nearly as many, but 18% BEV in November, which is outstanding, really. 10% for the whole year. Some of the things just I was reflecting for this year. Of course, we began in lockdown, but it's surprising how much it didn't affect the demand really through the year, considering it was really March that we came out of this, and the supply has been a problem during the year, but it's been great to see so many other leasing businesses and providers of vehicles starting to focus on EV, because our mission at Drive Electric has always been to just try and get as many people to do this as possible. We really mean it. We'll just advise people and help them to make the transition. During this year, like for us as a business as well, we're really proud to have completed a partnership with Sumitomo Corporation from Japan. So we're now 50-50 partnership with those guys, which gives us access to some exciting things in asset funding and so forth. And just picking up on a couple of things that Natasha was speaking about as well. Of course, the support from government has been really good. And I think it's easy to pick holes in things, but I think we all have to applaud the money spent on plug-in vehicle grants and charging. I think has been generally pretty good. Some of the providers, you're always going to get that, are not as good as others. But I think we're really seeing the benefit of that. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of putting chargers in every new home. I think the wiring should go in. I'm worried that the chargers might sit idle and then be out of date by the time they get used. Construction companies will just try and use the cheapest thing possible, because sometimes that's how they work. But I really applaud again the drive to get that moving. I think it's really important. And I think the other key thing from this year is public charging's started to really come a bit good. I saw the comments about, obviously there are still certain networks that don't work as well as others. But I think the real key to this is to publish, like, I think I'm allowed to mention this, Auto Express published a list of most reliable charging networks. And for me, that's the way to get this to shift, is to get the information out there of which ones are reliable and people will use them. So, give me a second. I just wanted to, looking forward a bit for next year, I just picked out a few of the things that we've been speaking about ourselves. So I think vehicle shortages is still a thing. right into perhaps June next year. I think we all agree, most of the people that are trying to supply EVs will know that it's short at least until March or April next year, because that's when we're being told loads of cars are arriving. It feels like the orders we take in the first quarter will still be under pressure. But as I'll show you in a minute, there's a lot of production coming, so I think it may swap around during the year. Home charger grant ends in April, so that's a significant thing, and we've all got to work out how we try and get people to still put those in, because the vehicles are a little less usable without it. I think that's important. Trying to survive on a 3-pin lead with a Tesla is not going to work. A lot of people try and do that, so we have to figure out how we fill the gap to help get that in there. Rapid charging networks, again, the support from government, I think, has been really good. The idea of getting the infrastructure in at motorway services, really applaud that, because it's a lot of money. This is serious money, hundreds of millions of pounds that will be needed to get the power, because they're quite remote sometimes. But even from the publicly announced initiatives that I can see, I would say that we go from about 5,000 rapids right today. That's chargers, not connections. There's 10,000 connections, which is a bit of a cheat because you can't use the machine on both connections at once, but there you go. I would say there's at least another 2,500 that I can see from various companies that have made announcements that are public, and probably in excess of that. So you're going to see a really dramatic change again in rapid chargers, and for most people that's the bit that they understand for their journeys and whatever. And obviously on street is beginning to come through as well, or close to home, and I think a focus on workplace is really required. And I know that there are plans to look at how we support businesses in their connection costs, because that's often the thing that's stopping that. There are smart ways to deal with that, such as the work that we do with crowd charge, that we think can help in workplace and scrunching that connection cost down. So I think all of the people on the call that deal with fleets are going to come across both of those things, public and workplace, how to fix them, and then home charger grants. How do we help support and fund perhaps the charger as part of the car? Another key thing to arrive, sorry, picking out a particular brand. I'm not a big Tesla fanboy, but the Tesla Model Y, you've seen what the Model 3 is doing for the price of the car. It's the unit sales are incredible, really. The Y is going to go another step further. More importantly, because the factory will open in Berlin to make those vehicles. So again, it's a shot in the arm for production. I'll come on to production a little bit in a moment as well. I know BRK may not come round just yet, but I think we should all be asking about this. There's business models out there that are relying on that information around salary sacrifice and things, that having that forecast is really important as to when changes may be happening. As a fleet business, we really need to know that to advise our customers as soon as possible. I actually think diesel may start to make a comeback v petrol, because the CO2 on diesels is still lower than petrols. It's a fact. Buying large petrol cars is the worst thing for CO2. It's just incredibly sad to see that happening. SUV petrol vehicles are not good, especially for the people that can't go EV because they drive a long way. It's a bad thing. It's a very bad thing. So we need to try and encourage people to think about that, and expect fleets to start asking about carbon accounting more closely, and how do they get to the truth for the carbon on their vehicles. And of course, electricity prices will be going up in April 2022, because all those poor companies are going bust because they have a price cap to deal with. And that will change. That may have a little bit of a ripple effect. Depends if petrol and diesel just keeps going up as well. But that is one thing that we will see coming through. So just briefly on the production and supply. you have to remember, I think last time I was here, I showed how much money was being spent by manufacturers on developments. So I've just put up a quick list of, this was just a quick scan, all public information, not really revealing anything that I know directly from them. But nearly all those manufacturers are at least doubling the capacity that they have through the opening of new factories. And I know there's a few US factories on there, but very often people like Mercedes will, ML was built in Tuscaloosa, I think, and brought to the UK. So it's not unusual for US cars to be brought to Europe as well. But you can see there, and if you just take Tesla alone, Berlin and Austin, you'd have to say are going to be north of 500,000 units each. So that doubles their capacity, probably to well over 2 million vehicles. And having a factory in Europe is going to make a big difference too. So a lot of production coming. And I think that we'll start to see the benefit of this. These are all announcements for 2022. 2023, there's even more coming. So when we look at, is this possible? I think we can start to see the concrete plans for that coming through. So it's very exciting. And then just going back to our forecast, I think I've explained this before, but we do it in two ways. We have a mathematical model that's based on this S-curve of technology instruction that we use. And we also tactically look at all those figures that I've showed you around production that we think is coming through from manufacturers. And we kind of do both of those and see if they're close, just to check. I have to say the S-curve's kind of winning on accuracy at the moment. And if you look at the numbers at the bottom, it becomes a little clearer. So we've got some actuals in there. And actually, we were out on 2021. Our original forecast was 208 because we had overall registrations pegged at about 2 million. I can't remember the exact figure, but so I think it was 2.1. And obviously, I think that caught us out that the restriction in supply was a bit of a surprise. But 10%, go back to the beginning of 2020 when we just been through a year at 3%, 10% 2 years later feels like a long way. 16% now doesn't feel that bad considering November was 18%. So just bear that in mind. I would expect overall the number of vehicles built and delivered to go up next year because of, I just think that the second half of the year we'll see a lot of vehicles coming through. But that does mean, if we're right, that we go to about 330,000 cars for next year, cars and light vehicles, that is, light vans. So, yeah, we're continuing to see the prediction that we made way back in 2018. Most of this we did in 2018. That ends up with us having half the car market in 2025 being BEV. If we're right, then that's 1.2 million cars. About 4 years from now, we'll start to see that sort of number coming through. So thanks very much. I'm just going to stop sharing there. So if that's okay, we'll end there. And if you've got any questions, I'll be really pleased to answer them.
Thanks for that, Mike. So just reflecting on the poll that we did, whether if there was unlimited supply, how much higher do you think BEV sales would be? And it looks like the vast majority are saying about 50% higher. So is that something you would agree with?
I'm not sure. I think I'd go with the average across Europe is we're about 30% down probably on production. So I think about 30% maybe. I think that's probably where we're at. And
when we sort of look at, where we are with BEV adoption, do you think we are at the stage now where BEVs are mainstream, or are we sort of still at the early adoption stage? And what would you say is the group who needs the most sort of focus if we are to unlock that mass uptake?
So firstly, I'm the wrong person to ask, obviously, because I kind of believed it being normal for a little while. But I would say, gauging the customers that we get through, they are becoming like regular people. And actually, because they're not early adopters, they need treating a little more carefully, I would say to everybody. You know, some people will just assume that there's an electric petrol pump out there and they're just going to use it, and they get very disappointed. So as an industry, we've got to really make sure that we make people understand what they're buying. I think it's really important. You know, we wouldn't want anyone to get an electric car. We've developed a lot of knowledge as a business, but I just want to see people get in the cars and use them and feel comfortable. It's the most important thing, really. So I think that's a key trend, really. Normal people buying cars rather than early adopters.
And apologies, I misread the poll result. It was 20%, not 50%, so it was more in line with what you were saying. If there was one intervention that you could make, what would it be?
I think vans are, I think Natasha explained, they are lagging behind. It's such an important area for us to get on with because of the deliveries. I mean, the urban knocks from vans, and especially the model we have with gig economy drivers, they will, forgive me, but I see a guy delivering in a Peugeot 308 on an 11 plate my Amazon parcels every day. Do you know what I mean? And somehow we've got to get that stuff fixed. And vans have been a bit of a challenge in terms of net cost. So I think if I'm going to be controversial, I actually think the plug-in the car grant is kind of about done, really. And we should really be focusing on the commercial vehicles now with that money, because it's going to go quick. 330,000 cars. If half of those are eligible, it's going to eat a lot of money quickly, and we could be using it in a different way, I think.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're out of time there, Mike, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. Great to see you, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
And just before I introduce our panel this morning, we have one final poll, which is what type of charging will meet your and your customers' needs, and a whole range of options there, from home, workplace, rapids, on street, non-residential car parks, motorway service areas, or a mix of all. And again, I can reflect on that once the panel are on stage. So I would like to welcome Natalia Peralta Silverstone, who's the head of propositions for Octopus Electric Vehicles, Sarah Gray, who's the EV lead for Rivus Fleet Solutions, Rui Ferrara, Chief Commercial Officer for Onto, and Melanie Shuffle-Botham, who's the co-founder and COO of ZapMap. So good morning to you all, and thanks for joining us this morning. Again, please do encourage the audience to put any questions in the Q&A box. But to kick us off, if I could pose a question to each of you, which would be, where do you think we are in terms of take up, and has 2021 panned out the way that you thought it would in terms of zero emission vehicle uptake and adoption? If I start with you, Natalia.
I mean, in short, yes. I've been in this industry 6.5 years, and I think this year has truly been that year where EV is just becoming the norm, right? But the uptake that we're seeing across, particularly businesses, because that's what we specialize in, has been crazy. So yeah, we're very happy with uptake this year. We're concerned by the supply chain issues and what that might mean. But according to Mike's forecasts, we might still be in for a good year in 2022.
Thank you, Natalia. Sarah?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think we are where we kind of need to be. We can't ignore the supply chain issues, because I think if they weren't there, then we probably would have seen a slightly higher uptake. And I think specifically for Rivus, we're more in the like commercial van front, and we have seen impacts on vans. I think when I look at the roads now, there's so many electric cars on the roads, but it's very difficult to still spot the electric vans. So I think there's more to be done there.
Thanks, Sarah. Rui, come to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Catherine. I'll be quite frank. I think I'm pleasantly surprised. I think this has kind of exceeded our expectations. There's been it's been an incredible year. There's been so much momentum behind EVs, so many things, whether it's, introduction of new models from manufacturers, whether it's, continuous tailwinds from incentives that the government is putting in place. And then I think this year, what really, which was really the third element, which is crucial, was consumer demand. It just has skyrocketed. So for us, from our point of view, it's really reached the point of no return. I don't think there's a question anymore about if. It's more about, and not even when. It's probably more of a question of how smooth the transition will be for consumers. But I think it's just been an absolutely incredible year, and quite frankly, a bit above beyond my expectations.
Fantastic. And Melanie, to you?
To me, 2021, considering we started in a lockdown and now we've had over 150,000 pure electric vehicles out on the road. At ZapMap, we're really noticing that because we're seeing just the sheer number of people who are using the app to get out and about. Beginning of the year, everyone at home. Then come April started to sort of open up a little bit. And then the summer, all those 100,000 new EV drivers out on the road. So yes, it's exceeded our expectations, especially from where we were at the beginning. And I think agreeing with one of Mike's points, I think the critical thing that's changing this year is that we're shifting from those people who've done loads and loads of research, really know what they're doing, to more people who are sort of just the general public, the consumer demands there. And I think that does have implications in terms of what we need to do as an industry in terms of making things simple, tying everything up, and making sure that EV drivers go out and have a great consumer experience.
That's a great point, Melanie.
As well.
And I think, there's been a lot of emphasis on the consumer experience of charging and things like that. And listening to Natasha, it seems that the government's focus is moving very much to infrastructure. Looking in the chat at some of the comments around some of the challenges for vans and charging infrastructure. In terms of the type of infrastructure that we need and some of the challenges that we're going to have to overcome, what do you think, where should the focus be? Maybe if I come to you first, Sarah, on that van point.
Yeah, I think actually, there have been some valid points raised on things like even just the size of the charging bays. So, if you've got a fairly large van, medium or long base van, whatever, to fit it in a lot of the charging bays at the moment is almost impossible. And then it depends where the charge point is on the van as to whether you can charge it. So I think, really, really great news story in terms of cars and the charging infrastructure for cars. But I would like to see more kind of investment or consideration for van drivers, I think. And, I don't want to come across as negative because there has been a lot of improvement. I think we're doing a really great job in terms of the, transition to electric vehicles. But for van drivers, they do suffer and they do have to pay more attention to public charging. If they're going to be using public charge points, they do need to concentrate a lot more on their journey planning because sometimes it's just not viable.
Thanks, Sarah. Melanie, if you've got anything to sort of add on the sort of what we need from charging sort of perspective.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two ends of the spectrum. One is all about the rapid charging network and ultra rapid charging. That's what most people think about, going from A to B. How can they charge reliably and as quickly as possible, and to make sure that that's simple. So, we need to continue. There's been great growth in the last year, particularly in the ultra rapid area. So we've added, there's 500. The beginning end of last year, there were 700 ultra rapid 100 kilowatt or more chargers. Now there's 1,200, so an additional 500. So it's really good to see the growth in that area. And that needs to continue. We need to have something that our drivers are telling us is that it's all very well to have one rapid charger, but we need to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rapid chargers in one location, so that even if one is not working, then there's other options. And then I think at the other side of the sort of charging journeys is all around the sort of home charging, and where people don't have home chargers, some kind of replacement for that, whether it's on-street charging, community charging, local charging hubs, rapid chargers, all of that piece, which we all know is an issue. And what we're hearing from fleets is that when people are doing trials, maybe people will put up their hands and say, yep, I want to trial it. And they've got off-street parking and that's all fine. But now as it rolls out, there are people who don't have off-street parking and that becomes more of an issue. So I think the two ends of the spectrum are really important to be addressing for fleets.
And Natalia, Rui, when you're sort of engaging with your customers, are there any sort of key questions or challenges that they sort of pose that potentially is making them, you know, hold back on their decision? Natalia, if maybe I've come to you first.
I mean, where someone can get a home charger, no, not really. It's kind of like a no-brainer. It makes sense. We can help them with that. Where it's out and about on the road, I think there's still uncertainty around how do I charge? Where do I charge? Will I be able to access it? Is it reliable? Do I need an app? Do I need a card? Is it contactless? So making public charging simple is so critical, right? It needs to be something that people don't need to think about. They just need to be able to turn up and charge. I think that's one from a consumer perspective. I think the other one, it doesn't stop them, but it's a niggle, is the disparity between someone who can charge at home versus someone who can't from a price perspective. So the EV tariffs that have come to market are amazing. They make it super cheap to charge at home. But if you can't charge at home, you're paying way over the odds versus a home charge customer. So I think creating, I guess, some equity in that space is important to scale this.
And Rui is a sort of Onto customer. I know that, you know, Onto subscriptions come with charging, you know, it's an all-inclusive charging. So any questions sort of that are posed from your customers before they take the leap?
Yeah, I think, you know, to be frank, the number one pain point majority of consumers have is again, that's back to the infrastructure and to the charging. And as you rightly mentioned, Catherine, it's paramount in our view to include the charging because it facilitates the transition. We still have so many different solutions every time you pull up at a charging station, whether it runs on a card, a subscription, a membership, credit card. So there is a lot of complexity. So we try to take that away, and that helps. But I would probably say that our customer service, the majority of times that is taking calls from customers is, "Ooh, this doesn't work," or "How does it work?" So it continues definitely to be a pain point. I think the recent announcement of the government about making mandatory the charging infrastructure in new builds and specifically retail parks and locations like that in office buildings, although the press focused on home. To me, the really good news is on that side, because still there's quite a lot of the population in the UK who can't charge at home. And that to me is exciting because those are also a little bit more logical locations that consumers tend to go to and not necessarily where a lot of the locations currently, where the charging locations are today. So yeah, charging is clearly, you know, something that has to be tackled between hopefully government and entrepreneurs and the existing providers. And I think that's just going to continue to make the transition easier and easier for consumers.
Okay, and we've got a question here, which I'll again pose to you all, but if anyone particularly wants it, just give me a nod. It's from Jack Mumford, and it's: what more can manufacturers do to help support consumers make the switch to electric? No one's giving me a nod.
Yeah,
I don't mind.
You go.
Sure. I mean, I'm a little bit pragmatic when I look at these types of situations. In the end of the day, the manufacturers are out to make a profit. They have shareholders, they have investors. I think what they have to invest to do a change to go to electric is huge. The investment required, typically on cycles of 5 or 7 years in terms of the life cycle of a car, we are talking about billions and billions of pounds, not to mention the manufacturing facilities that are required. So I think OEMs are doing a pretty decent job. And probably the most important thing they can do is make exciting products that have really good range and that consumers are going to, it's going to generate some emotion and passion behind that is going to drive. But in my point of view, obviously there's always that conflict. They still need to push some petrol and diesels to make the numbers work. But I think overall manufacturers are finally getting engaged. We just look at next year, the amount of models coming onto into the industry, into the market is exciting. Segments that have been typically underrepresented, where there's only been 1 or 2 players. So I think the market itself is going to continue to be very competitive and very engaging and exciting with all the products coming on.
Melanie, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would add to that is that I think the price point continues to be an issue for EV drivers, even though we know that people can buy, lease cars over a period of time, etc., etc. But to me, there's absolutely missing cars in the lower segments to give people choices. I mean, there's loads of electric SUVs coming out, which concerns me at quite a few different levels. We all know that people like to have choice in different segments. Yes, the cars are coming, but they need to keep the pressure up and make sure that the prices are coming down. And then I think the second bit that the car manufacturers can do is all around customer education, and they're very comfortable with the car, but when it comes to charging, they need to be able to communicate charging, understand charging. When the driver leaves the forecourt or the leasing company, they need to be very confident that they can go out and charge on the public network. So I'd say there's a whole education piece that dealers and car manufacturers also need to engage with.
And Natalia, when we sort of talk about price parity and encouraging people to make that transition, do you think, salary sacrifice is helping, and what's the impact of that been?
Yes, it does. I mean, I think the total cost of ownership conversation is, and salary sacrifice work together really well. The benefit in kind rates really make it stack up, right? I think the most affordable way to get an electric car today is through salary sacrifice. I think it's also a really interesting route to market, because you're accessing a whole pool of consumers who are just everyday consumers. These are people who are being presented with an opportunity to go electric that they might not have thought of, or they might have not considered doing now, but because their business is implementing salary sacrifice, they're like, oh, it kind of makes sense. Then you kind of talk them through the economics of it, and it's really effective. So from our perspective, I mean, we've seen a huge growth this year. We're talking tens of thousands of employees are coming on every month that can have access to a salary sacrifice car. So yeah, I think it's a great avenue to access more consumers that might not otherwise look at going electric quite so soon.
Yeah. And Sarah, where we don't have perhaps the same incentives for van drivers, what are you doing at Revis? I know you've done some research to sort of support people on this journey. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of that research?
Sorry, I think Helen was struggling to unmute me there, but yeah, definitely. We've at Revis, we've got a lot of light commercial vehicle customers, so they want to understand how vehicles are operationally going to be fit for use. So I think just coming back to Jack's original question about the manufacturers and what they can do to help consumers in the van world, it'll be great to understand how they perform in the real world, and that's exactly what we've done. So we've tested 11 vehicles so far to understand what happens if you put roof furniture on, what happens if you put a full payload, what happens if you use it in power mode rather than eco mode, so we can see what actually happens to the range, because we've mentioned TCO today, and that's a key point. If you're looking at the manufacturer's stated range and basing your total cost of ownership on that, that's great if you're doing that across the level playing field against all different manufacturers. But when you're actually running these vehicles and you're not quite meeting that range because you have got a full payload and you have got roof furniture, that obviously contributes to the total cost of ownership. So all the testing that we're doing is supporting that full life cycle to understand, first of all, if you have got a full payload, what does that do to the range? How does that impact operationally? And then secondly, what's that going to do to the total cost of ownership? And I think from a manufacturer's point of view, it'd be great if they were slightly more open and honest about testing. Now, they don't have to be, because it's not within the WLTP testing regimes, but it would be great to say on a sliding scale, if I'm using 50% payload, what can I expect that to do to the range? And then that gives a bit more confidence to consumers in terms of how these vehicles will work. So that's really what we're doing our testing for. So customers really appreciate that kind of information, because they need to understand how the vehicles are used, can they perform, they want to transition, they just need a bit more confidence to do so.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think there's another question here, which is anonymous, but it's on vans. Which barrier needs the most work? Vehicle capability or charging network, or something else entirely?
It's probably both, actually. I think supply of vehicles at the moment is obviously a big issue, and then even when you think, great, there's going to be a vehicle launched in the next few months that's going to have the right payload or whatever else, suddenly when you look at that operationally again, and the usage that you have to do on that, is it going to be fit for purpose? So I think, yeah, the vehicle needs to be fit for purpose. And then if you haven't got the luxury of your drivers, engineers, whatever, taking those vehicles home and charging them at night on their driveway, if they're having to use the public network, then again, there's another barrier they have to overcome, because they need to have confidence that they can charge that vehicle, whether that's at a depot. And again, making sure that the bays are big enough within the depot. Have you got the space? Have you got the capacity in terms of charging? And then if they are using the public, you know, we really need to help people. And I think that's where support's required. We've done loads of mapping for customers to say, you know, this is where your vehicles are traveling in the majority. If you charge them up at this location, that's going to be the ideal preference. But then you have to do even more research to say, what do those bays look like? For example, if they're in a car park and you've got a roof height, can they actually access that car park? So there is lots of work to be done. And again, I don't want to come across negative, because there's so much great stuff that's happening. But when we come to vans, I think, there's kind of a misconception that you can just transition, and you can't. You do need to do that kind of consultancy research part at the beginning to understand if it is viable.
Thanks, and I'm really conscious of time, and apologies, we are nearly out of time, but I'm just going to ask you one final question each. Which would be, what are you most excited about as we go into 2022? Perhaps if I start with you, Natalia.
What I'm most excited about, I mean, I'm excited to see this continue to grow and to become a mass consumer product. I'm also excited about just all the new entrants to market, right? So, for example, we've got new manufacturers coming to the market this year. We've got someone like Oracat coming from China and selling in the UK, and I'm super excited about that, and seeing how other companies can disrupt incumbents. I'm excited to see what this year holds in that space.
And Melanie?
Hi, yeah, I think as we shift to the mass market, I think that the thing I'm most excited about is the fact that I think that simple cross-network payment will become a reality this year, because there's so much demand both from consumers and fleets. It's such a pain point, and we're seeing real progress with ZapPay, having signed up 9 network operators will all be integrated, and we've got many more in the pipeline. So I think next year will be a year in which this big pain point will start to be resolved.
Rui?
To me, just the momentum behind consumers, the enthusiasm, the passion, how EVs have become mainstream, and all the car magazines, consumer talk. There's so much excitement behind it, and so many new models coming onto the market next year. So we can't wait to get our hands on those.
And Sarah?
Yeah, similar new models to market. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a converted electric 4x4 at our office, and it was exciting because everyone's crying out for a 4x4 that's going to perform in the electric world. So I think there's some new entrants, some different converters looking at sort of new innovations, and it's exciting times.
Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Thanks very much. And again, hope to see you all soon. Thank you. Just before we finish for today, I'd just like to remind people that there is the expo area that you can visit. We will be circulating a feedback form, so we're really keen to make sure that we keep, top quality speakers and topics that are going to be of interest. So please do fill that in and let us know if there are any particular speakers or topics you'd like us to address as we go into next year. A huge thank you to all of our speakers and to you, the audience, for joining us this morning. The next Fleets in Charge webinar is on Wednesday, the 16th of February. So again, you can join us, and more details are available on the BVRLA's website on Fleets in Charge. And then finally, just to remind you that we do have several learning and development courses around electric vehicles. And again, the course dates are up on the screen through January and into February. And more details can again be found on our website. And if you want to book onto one of those courses, you can do so by emailing training@bvrla.co.uk. But some of this information is also in the Expo area, so please do take a look. Thank you all so much again. Thanks for joining us throughout the whole year of events, and we really look forward to seeing you again in 2022. Take care, everyone. Thank you.